कुमार स्वामी नायक गोंगो लिबू लटोका रेडियो फीजी 2 में पुराना गाना लगे हमें बहुत अच्छा लगे।
रेडियो फीजी 2 देश की धड़कन।
In the news tonight, QAUIA brings widespread flooding. Fijians forced to flee their homes as waters rise. And parts of Vanolevu still underwater.
From the studios of FBC Suva, Atera Lendua.
The Fiji Meteorological Services maintains that the calm weather in parts of Viti Levu will deteriorate this evening as the center of QAUIA remains just off the coast of Suva. Overnight and into this morning, the system brought torrential rain and strong winds, resulting in widespread flooding in Vanolevu and parts of Viti Levu. Acting Director Terry Atalifo says Fijians in flood-prone areas can't let their guards down. Later this evening, QAUIA will move closer to Kandavu. However, the severe weather will continue over Viti Levu throughout the night. This will bring more rain with a possibility of continued flooding in many parts of Fiji. A tropical cyclone warning remains in force for the whole of the Fiji group. A flood warning remains in force for all low-lying areas and areas adjacent to small streams and major rivers of Fiji. A flash flood warning remains in force for all low-lying areas and areas adjacent to small streams and creeks for Fiji.
The center of the system is along the coast of between Suva and Nauru. Even though it's calm for the Suva area, it's going to pick up as the center moves further south. So we are not out of the woods yet. People will still need to stay indoors as the system tracks further south because the rain and the winds will pick up in the next few hours.
Felipe Naikaso is live now from Nandi. Felipe, are we out of danger yet?
To answer that question, I'm joined with the Acting Director for Fiji Met, Mr. Terry Atalifo. Mr. Atalifo, in terms of the Central Division, it's pretty calm. Is the worst behind us?
Thank you, Felipe. So at this stage, the centre has moved towards Kandavu, and the Central Division is sheltered at this stage. So that's why it's a bit calm at this stage. But everyone else in the country is still experiencing strong winds, heavy rainfall. So that's the reason why the Eastern Division is experiencing calm conditions, because they're quite sheltered.
What happens from tonight and which areas will be affected?
So QAUIA is expected to slow down throughout the night as it dives south, and this condition is going to persist throughout the night. Strong winds, strong and gusty winds, damaging gale force winds, especially over Vanolevu, the Lau and Lomaviti group, and rain will continue throughout the whole country.
In terms of TD07F, it's causing some concerns. How will it affect Fiji, and will it become a cyclone?
Well, for tropical depression TD07F, the probability of it becoming a cyclone in the next 24 hours is quite high at this stage. In terms of its expected track, it's going to follow a very similar track as Cyclone Ana. So the office is closely monitoring the situation, and we will advise the public as and when we receive more information.
Mr. Atalifo, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Felipe. Many villages in Savusavu were underwater this morning due to widespread flooding as the Bangata River burst its bank earlier today. Many families lost their belongings and some their homes. One resident risked his life to retrieve a canoe so he could rescue stranded families. Dipesh Kumar reports.
46-year-old Dinesh Ram says he had to swim through the flooded waters to get a boat and save 16 people from their flooded house.
I rescued with my friend 16 people. We rescued and we are inside. And the two families are still near the sea.
He says this is one of the worst natural disasters they have experienced. Farms and livestock have gone with the floodwaters.
All the farms in this area like Belango, Bangata, Bunivesi and Balimbale, right to the coastal line, all the farm is damaged. It's underwater at the moment.
For Vunivesi resident Solomon and Nalumia, moving to the evacuation center was the first priority as they knew their village was prone to flooding.
Came along the house, inside the house. All the house there in the village are flooded with water. And our hall here in University is half flooded with water.
Rain and winds have died down in Sabu Sabu, but residents are waiting for the all clear from authorities before returning home. Most areas are still under flood waters. Dipesh Kumar, FBC News.
Families in Batiri village in Senganga took precautionary measures and fled to a nearby evacuation center before it was too late. Resident Akhtar Hussain says none of the homes were spared by the rising floodwaters. Kritika Kumar reports.
Batiri village has become inaccessible due to flooding, meaning families can't return home tonight.
The housing, just nearby the housing, the settlements, all is underwater. The Seganga town bridge is, both sides the road is blocked, you cannot come or go. And in Batiri there, you cannot cross the villages because all is flooded.
Residents living in Senganga experienced heavy rain and strong winds for most of the day. Those who wanted to help desperate neighbors were unable to move out of their homes. The Senganga police post was also underwater.
And same situation in Reketi, there's a few houses underwater, the road is all underwater. And Nambalu, between Sabsabu junction to Nambalu, there's a road has been swept away.
The same situation was seen in Reketi as houses and roads were underwater. Reketi resident Ravinesh Chand says they only managed to save some of their livestock.
Oh, most of the animals, they are damaged, they are died, yeah. We have managed to save, but we can't save it.
The Senganga Health Center was also flooded. Many residents living in low-lying areas of Senganga were evacuated by police. Kritika Kumar, FBC News.
Lambasa town and nearby areas were not spared, and this evening flood waters have not receded. Residents could only watch as waters entered Main Street, flowed into shops and eventually covered the whole town. Hospital Road and the Botanical Gardens, which lie beside the Lambasa River, were also under flood waters. Wulobi is also flooded after the Ngawa River burst its banks. Flood waters also entered classrooms at the All Saints Secondary School, while Wunibao is also underwater and the bridge clogged with heavy debris. Watunimbali Road is now a sea of murky water, inaccessible to all traffic and blocking off access to Mbulileka, Low Cost, Bodha, Bombale, Urata, Lobelobe, Reketi Lailai and Lekutulevu. Families in Wuniwaiwai settlement and Latokamu settlement in Lambasa have been evacuated to the Sukanaivalu barracks. They were brought to the army camp in boats and the help of RFMF engineers and corrections officers. Women and children alike, with their clothes drenched, are now taking shelter at the army camp. The settlements are located just beside the Ngawa River, which burst its banks early this morning. Severe flooding occurred in the Wainimbuka River, affecting a number of nearby villages. Turanganikoro of Wailotua village, Vilikesa Tumbui Tamana, says their homes remain underwater this evening after the Wainimbuka River burst its banks. Josiah Nunga reports the water level hasn't subsided due to the continuous rain in the province.
Wailotua villagers says it was like watching their homes sink as water levels kept rising until in the end, only the rooftops could be seen from a distance.
Wind speed is slowly dying out, but the rain continues. All our farms have been destroyed and the majority of our belongings have been washed away by the floodwaters. We are glad that all villages are safe, and I have been reminding the villagers to stop wading into flooded waters as it might rise again tonight.
Tumbui Tamana says villagers first moved to the community hall for shelter this morning. However, the water level continued to rise at around midday, prompting them to move further to higher ground.
We normally go to the church and community hall to seek shelter when a disaster strikes, but this is a very serious case and we had to ensure villagers are safe. We pray that the situation will calm down later tonight.
Nalalawa village was also not spared, with more than 10 homes flooded and residents forced to flee to the community hall. Nrana villager Solo Wangatabu says villagers started their preparations 3 days ago to ensure their houses and belongings are well secured.
We just felt strong winds and heavy rain. Most of our farms have been completely destroyed. The Raiwasa and Korotali crossing in the district of Naroko were also underwater, affecting accessibility.
With high tide tonight, the river level is expected to rise further, posing more danger to villagers who live along the Waidimbook River. Chosai Nanunga, FBC News.
Chosai joins us live now. Chosai, Kandavo is expected to feel the brunt of TC Ana tonight. What are the people on Kandavo experiencing right now?
I have been liaising very closely with some villages in Kandavo, as TC Ana is expected to make landfall on the island tonight. I was just speaking with Sikoa Watu, who is originally from Ono a while ago. He says right now they are experiencing heavy rain and strong winds, which is even more stronger to what they've experienced at around midday. Right now, also most villages along the coast are experiencing coastal flooding. According to some Turangani Koros, preparations started early as Friday upon hearing the tropical cyclone alert on radio. Hence, boat operators and villagers have been advised to strictly follow warnings issued by relevant authorities and also refrain or avoid making unnecessary movements, particularly out at sea. Now, Teva disaster preparedness is something my Tawus from Kandavo are renowned for, as they do not want a repeat of severe disasters they've encountered over the years. I've also received information that a good number of villages of Fijians are now taking shelter in various evacuation centers, while some remain in their respective homes to avoid mishaps as TC Ana is moving towards the group. Teva.
Vinaka Chosai. Up ahead, Fijians ignore warnings and QAUIA residents flee rising waters.
मैं तो दिल्ली में रहता हूँ और रेडियो फीजी बहुत रेडियो फीजी रोज सुनता हूँ.
रेडियो फीजी 2 देश की धड़कन.
Strong winds and heavy rain were experienced by Fijians living in the Ra province early this morning. As TC Ana made landfall in the province, many families had already prepared for the worst, while some had moved into evacuation centers. Felipe Nacaso has more.
This is the trail of destruction left behind by TC Ana as it cut through the Ra province this morning. A few power lines and trees had also fallen along the King's Highway from Rekereke town to Barotu village. Flooding was a major issue for villagers as the system brought lots of rain.
All the floodwaters will try to come inside Masope. So it's quite a loss of stock and even the business as well. So no customer, no sale.
Families living in low-lying areas of Ra had secured their homes and moved into evacuation centers from yesterday.
Rain was really heavy from yesterday, so we decided to get our things ready and move to a safer place because our village usually floods.
All our things got wet because the strong winds ripped apart our roof.
At this evacuation center, 7 families are taking shelter, awaiting word on when they can move back home. Tavua and Rekereke town are still closed as firefighters are trying to clean the area. Power and communication lines have also been affected. The majority of feeder roads are still flooded and vehicles are not able to cross. Felipe Naikaso, FBC News.
The Waimanu River burst its banks this morning, prompting affected communities to evacuate and move to higher ground. As a precautionary measure, majority of villagers from Sawani fled their homes and took shelter at a nearby church, hall and school. Kelly Badala reports.
Taking no risk, these villagers ensured the safety of everyone was a priority, using a fiberglass boat to transport children and women first once the major river overflowed.
Yes, last night we encountered strong winds and heavy rains. It went on till this morning. In the village of Sawani, there are two, the Waimanu River, and another one is a small stream that runs on the other side of the village. Both of these, the Waimanu River and the stream broke the banks.
They saw a tropical cyclone yesterday to Fijians in the north, and they were not going to leave anyone behind.
You can see now in the village there, you hardly see any windows and doors because we have already put corrugated iron.
The village headman says they had to move affected villagers as they cannot afford to lose any lives during the height of TC Ana.
Floodwaters kept rising, so we had no choice but to evacuate. We have learned from past events, so safety is paramount.
The Rawa River in Nosori also burst its bank earlier today, and police quickly responded to the situation. Almost a ghost town, only a few people were seen waving down police vehicles seeking assistance to evacuate. Police and first responders closely monitored the movement of people in and out of Nosori, putting up roadblocks and ensuring no Fijian was left behind. A landslide near Delkusha Hill this morning restricted traffic to a single lane, and Fiji Roads Authority contractors were deployed to clear the road. Kelly Vadala, FBC News.
Several families in informal settlements around Suva waited until the last minute to move to evacuation centers as Tropical Cyclone Ana bore down on the Central Division. This practice has become common for many, putting not only their lives at risk, but also those of first responders. Apenisa Wangarandova reports people were reluctant to move until the winds started to intensify.
Families from the G2 Estate informal settlement in Rewanga, Suba have taken shelter at the Vishnu Dea Memorial School along Grantham Road.
We were just at home last night, and after the winds got stronger, blowing off some roofs, and rain started coming in the house, we then decided to contact police to help us move to the school.
Many of these people only moved after seeing the severity of the winds. Across from G2 is Wailea settlement, where residents have remained in their homes despite the strong winds and heavy rain.
From last night, heavy raining, still going. Was flood, heavy rain, was strong windy, some tins fall down.
Devi says floodwaters entered her house last night. However, she is still undecided on whether to move to an evacuation center.
Yeah, maybe. If the heavy rain comes, then we go.
Many children were also seen roaming the streets in Wailea without supervision. Police are now stationed at evacuation centers as well as these settlements to control unnecessary movement. Apenisong Grandobu, FBC News.
Families in QAUIA Lami had to flee their homes earlier today as floodwaters entered their homes. Residents say waters rose quickly this morning and a lot of their belongings were damaged. Aiden Singh reports these families have taken shelter in the Lami Catholic Church Hall.
Silio Nanduva saw floodwaters rising at about 8:30 this morning, and those whose homes were affected began evacuating straight away.
Evacuation center is right in the Lami Catholic Hall. And people have been moving down to the evacuation centers. Police have been coming to help take people down to the evacuation centers.
Josatek Indaveta says when he heard about the impending cyclone, he secured his cover stall at the Lami market and his home.
In Lami, it's only the wind was strong, but we can see not as much as damage as you can see. Only the trees, some branches. But our house and business is all good.
Floodwaters in QAUIA receded this morning, leaving behind destroyed homes, belongings and vegetation. Aiden Singh, FBC News.
Majority of communities in Korovo were affected by floodwaters since this morning, prompting families to flee their homes. Access roads, including the main highway, were underwater, making it difficult for affected Fijians to move into town or evacuation centers. Pictures sent in from residents show several homes inundated with debris as strong winds and heavy rain pelted the area throughout the day. Most businesses in town remained closed as police made rounds ensuring affected Fijians were assisted. School compounds were also seen littered with debris and covered with murky water. There were also fallen trees, broken power lines and landslides near several roads. Earlier today, residents of Ndawakoto settlement in Varata Wailevu Nosori had to flee their homes for safety as floodwaters entered their homes. Resident Atunaisa Wondowondo says they woke up to floodwaters around their homes and the situation worsened when the Railway River burst its banks this afternoon. Wondowondo says some houses in low-lying areas were submerged in the floodwaters with plantations destroyed. Roads were also flooded.
We started experiencing heavy rain from last night. That's when surface flooding started occurring. Heavy rain started to pour down heavily in the morning and wind picked up in speed. That's when the floodwaters rose and entered our homes. Our plantation and road are completely underwater.
Still to come, fallen trees litter Suva. And the Asawa villagers count their lucky stars. That's after the break.
हमारे सामने नाइक है गोंगो लिबू लटोका रेडियो फीजी 2 में पुराना गाना लगे हमें बहुत अच्छा लगे
रेडियो फीजी 2 देश की धड़कन।
Resident of Nananu in Tailevu counted their lucky stars when water level receded earlier today. Villagers feared they would lose their homes, properties and plantations to storm surges. Villager Fulori Ringamoto says they were preparing for the worst, particularly coastal flooding as water levels breached the sea wall. Ringamoto says some villagers evacuated to Ratu Kandavulevu school while others confined in their homes.
Although the heavy rain and strong wind died down later in the day,
over 10 families of Vesari settlement in Nandera had to be moved to an evacuation center at 3 a.m. as TC Ana was hammering the Eastern Division. Residents say they were not prepared for the Category 2 cyclone. 16 houses were affected, and despite the numerous advisories, some residents say they were not aware of the severity of the winds. Residents say they returned home only to see damages to their houses and household items. The same community came under the spotlight when children were spotted swimming in a nearby creek. Police had to intervene and those involved were taken in for questioning. Trees have fallen on several roads in Suva as a result of the strong winds. Power lines were also down in some areas. The famous Ibi tree in the heart of Suva, which has withstood many cyclones, succumbed to the strong winds. Other roads where trees had fallen include Rewa Street, Princess Road and Waimanu Road, and Wunakethe Road and Rag Avenue in Namandi Heights, among others. The Fiji Roads Authority has since cleared many of these areas and roads have been opened to traffic. Community members were also seen trying to clear trees that had fallen onto some of these roads. Tropical cyclone Ana has destroyed many farms and some houses in the Asawas. Tamusua villager Siona Ratulevu says tree branches and debris are scattered everywhere and storm surges partly damaged houses along the coast. Ratulevu added communication was disrupted at around 6 yesterday evening, the exact time TC Ana made landfall in the Asawa group.
Some of the roofs have been blown away and the sea was very rough last night. We continue to ensure that our basic items are stocked. We are grateful that all villagers are safe when we are slowly moving back to our respective houses after spending the night at the evacuation centers.
Heavy rain and winds up to storm force strength were experienced over most parts of the country today. Tropical cyclone Ana made landfall over northern Viti Levu in the early hours of today. TC Ana moved south and drifted over the ocean in the afternoon today, passing between Suva and Navua. In the west, the wind picked up in some places with scattered showers. Eastwards from Pacific Harbour to Suva, gale force winds and heavy rain persisted for most of the day. And up north, heavy rain brought flooding in many places. At sea, a storm warning remains in force for the Kandavu and Watuira Passage, the Koro Sea and southern Lao waters. A gale warning remains in force for the rest of the Fiji waters. Northerly winds up to 45 knots, gusting to 65 knots. Turning to the tides, the next high tide is at 8:15 tonight, with low tide at 2:11 a.m. tomorrow. Sunrise is at 5:57. Tomorrow, the forecast is for more rain and cloudy conditions over most places. Localized heavy falls may lead to flash flooding of low-lying areas. Outlook for Tuesday, the rainy weather is likely to persist. Recapping our main stories: widespread flooding due to TC Ana, TD07F to bring more rain and flooding in the coming days, and families remain in evacuation centres. For these stories and others, you can tune in daily to our sister radio station, Gold FM. To our poll question this week, we're asking, are Fijians becoming complacent about diabetic lifestyle? Visit our FBC website to answer. You can send us newsworthy pictures and videos on email, fbcnews@fbc.com.fj, or share it with us via our Facebook and Twitter accounts. That's your news for tonight. Until tomorrow, stay safe and Mwadmanda.
हमारे सामने नायक है गोंगवा लेबू लटोका रेडियो FIJI 2 में